Hello everybody. Welcome. It's great to have you with us in this webinar in which we're going to introduce you to two new features that we announced last month, the Data Optimizer and Application Insights. And the reason we're so excited is because we believe that these two features are going to help you guys extract more value from your data with these features. My name is Daniel Berman. I'm a products evangelist here at Logz.io, and with me here is Ran Ramati. Ran is a solutions architect at Logz.io and is going to give us a hands-on demo of the two features we're going to be talking about. We'll be answering your questions at the end of the webinar. So if something pops up, feel free to enter your question and we'll do our best to answer all of the questions, like I said, at the end of the webinar. Before we get started, just a reminder about Logz.io, who we are, what we do. We are an intelligent log analysis platform that combines the ELK stack as a cloud service with sophisticated machine learning to derive insights from your machine-generated data. On top of the ELK stack, we've added a series of enterprise-grade features. So, for example, a built-in alerting mechanism, so you can get notified in real time about specific queries or aggregated queries. ELK apps, which is a library of pre-made dashboards and visualizations for different log types. Livetail, so you can see a live feed of the different logs as they're coming in, being streamed in from the different data sources in their raw format. Audit trail, role-based access, user control, etc. Security, put a huge focus on security at Logz.io. We're the only SOC 2 compliant ELK stack out there. We are also HIPAA compliant. We are GDPR ready. We also ISO 27001 certified and recently also received a PCI level 1 compliance. On top of all of this is a layer of artificial intelligence and machine learning that helps our users actually sift through all of their data and derive insights from it, and we'll be seeing one of these components later on in the webinar. So we all know that log data is an extremely valuable resource to have at our disposal, right? Representing the raw output of running processes in our environment, logs can contain a wealth of information about what happened, when it happened, and probably more importantly, why it happened. These are the famous 5 W's that people talk about when theorizing about logs. And yes, people do theorize about logging, you'd be surprised. But the issue is that as your company succeeds and as your application grows and the infrastructure behind your application grows, so does your log data. And this growth in data comes at a cost, an operational cost. DevOps teams and IT operations teams finding it increasingly challenging to actually sift through all of this data and find the logs that matter, but also an actual cost. More logs means more storage. And more storage means basically more expensive logging tools. And so a paradox is created. A paradox between a growth on the one hand between the growing amount of data you're shipping from your environment and a decrease on the other hand in the value that you can extract from the data. And this is precisely where the two features that we're going to be talking about in this webinar come into the picture. The Data Optimizer will help companies reduce logging costs and logging noise by helping them aggregate and store important log data and key metrics in dedicated accounts with extended retention. Application Insights is a new machine learning technology that identifies new exceptions and errors being thrown by their applications and gives you the tools and information you need to quickly understand these events and resolve them. So let's take a closer look, and we'll be starting with the Data Optimizer. So existing pricing models in the log analysis industry are based on two interrelated axes: data volume and retention. So companies are basically paying for storing all of their data for a specific amount of time. This could be 7 or 14 days, it could be 30 days, it could be 90 days or longer. This would be great, but in some cases, in fact, in many cases, some of this data isn't as important. Some of this data doesn't need to be retained for the same amount of time. For troubleshooting, forensics, for example, companies would need to save all of their logs, but for a relatively limited amount of time, say a couple of days, 7 days, a maximum of 14 days. But for other use cases, say for security or compliance, analyzing business metrics or trend analysis, companies might make do with summarizing just a small part of their data, but they'd need to retain this for an extended period of time. This could be for a year or even longer. But the issue is that existing logging vendors don't recognize this differentiation. And what they offer is a rigid, all-or-nothing, comprehensive pricing model. So the end result of this is that companies need to compromise. They compromise by opting for a pricing model that doesn't reflect their data, doesn't reflect their needs or their resources. And this compromise is twofold. A, companies end up paying for storing data that doesn't need to be retained in the first place. And B, because of the steep prices, the retention they end up paying for is not sufficient enough for retaining important data over time. Logz.io's data optimizer helps companies break away from these pricing models by giving them the ability and the flexibility to decide what data needs to be retained, what data for how long, and at what granularity. So users, instead of saving all of their log data for weeks or months at a time, they can store and aggregate and summarize important data and key metrics into dedicated accounts, which we call timeless accounts, which have extended retention. They can use aggregation rules, which we call optimizers, to summarize their data, which actually reduces the original size of the logs and pushes the data into these timeless accounts. And the end result of this is that you end up paying for retaining the data that you need. And at this point, I'd like to pass on the mic to Ran, who will give us a demo of the data optimizer.
Thanks, Daniel. So, as Daniel mentioned, there are two components that will help reduce the data. The first component is the timeless account, which basically allows the persistent storage of data that is not like the other daily index that we have that is rotating. And as you can see here in our management, in the admin pages, you have the ability to define a regular sub-account or regular index that will be daily. And we added a new section to add the timeless account, where I can just simply add a allocate a new index and give the appropriate volume that is needed for that specific index. I can also specify which of my sub-accounts or which of my other accounts are able to read and write from that specific timeless account. Now, how do I get the data actually inside? So let's take an example of ELB logs. I have the load balancer that is generating a huge amount of data that I don't really care about all of the data that to store all of the data and to have the raw data to store it for a longer period. If I look at the log on the ELB log, I have many items that are not that relevant. What I really want to know is I want to be able to look back and to see trend about the backend processing time, and I want the ability to group it by the, let's say, the country name and the city that the connection originated from. So the way I will do it, I will click on the Create Alert. This will get me to the page that the new page layout for either creating an alert or an optimizer. Basically, that's a trigger. At the first part, I'll see the query that I used, so I'm looking only on type ELB. I'll add the groupings that I would like the data to be grouped by, so select for ELB. Now I want to see the country name, and I want also, as I mentioned, to have the city. So Gary P, and I'll select the city name. Here I'll give this this optimizer a name, so I'll call it ELB and processing time by city, and I'll select the trigger to be an optimizer and not the alert. Here I will select to which of my timeless account I will put the data inside. And next, I'll get to the schedule. So on the schedule, first of all, I will select the aggregation. So I want, as I said, I want the average of the backend processing time. So again, I'll select the correct field and backend processing time. And I will ask the system for every minute to summarize the data and to prepare a log that will hold the data and the relevant data of the average processing time per city and per country. Now, what it will do is actually, instead of having tens of thousands of records, I will have one record that will hold the data, and you can see the output of this optimizer here in this section that basically creates a very short and very summarized log that holds only the relevant data that I can then retain to a much longer period, and I'm able to put it in dashboard visualization, of course, like any other information in Kibana, and I'm able to view the trend for a much, much longer period. So if my retention, for example, my plan is 14 days, I can retain it in the timeless index, a very small portion of the data for much, much longer period, and by that, gaining the ability to view trends in a better way. Another use case, so this is the use case for logs, metrics, KPIs that I want to aggregate and to summarize. Another use case can be that I want to actually store a specific log. So let's say you have a log of AWS logins that you need to retain them for compliance reason for a longer period. And what you can do is, if I remove all of the aggregations, so basically every 10 minutes I'll go and find logs that are based on a specific query, but in the default format it will just copy the raw log as it is into the timeless account. So, and I can select, for example, maybe I need something that is for my SOC, I need something for my compliance and so on. I can just maintain the data, that specific log out of the millions of other records, so just the relevant logs that I need to keep for the compliance part. So that's the short demo for the timeless, and back to Daniel.
Thank you, Ran. Moving on, application insights. So as we all know, nothing in life ever executes as we expect, and applications are no exception to that rule. Errors and exceptions are thrown all the time by our applications. A user enters a bad import, resource goes missing, and we use exception handling and exception logging to, well, handle these exceptions and analyze them and resolve them. But the issue is that even a small to medium-sized application throws a huge amount of these exceptions. And with CI and CD processes pushing new versions of our application into production and into our other environments more frequently, it becomes increasingly challenging to not only identify any new exception being thrown, but also to correlate these events with the changes that we're applying in the environment. So we all know that if something breaks suddenly in production, the first question that's asked internally is, who did what? Who touched something? And with all of this operational noise created by these errors and exceptions, it becomes very, very difficult to actually find a correlation between the cause and effect. Logz.io's application insights is a new machine learning technology that will identify any new exception or error thrown by our applications and give you the tools and contextual information you need to easily analyze the event and quickly resolve it. So users can now see any new error or exception thrown by the application. They don't need to go over each occurrence for every exception. The system knows how to identify unique events. You can integrate with your continuous delivery tools and then correlate these events with changes made in your environment. For example, new code deployments, rollbacks, etc. Using a variety of different actions that are made available in the system, you can quickly understand the context in which these events are taking place and analyze them and resolve them. This is the first time in actuality that a logging system has integrated itself with continuous delivery to streamline development. And at this point, again, I'd like to pass on the mic to Ran for a demo.
Thanks, Daniel. So I would like to introduce you to our new insight page. I hope that by now you tried our cognitive insight and try and looked at the things that were found by harnessing the crowdsourcing information from multiple data sources around the internet and to find interesting events in your logs. And we added the application insight, as Daniel said, that comes to answer a very problematic question of is this a new exception? When was the first time we actually saw that exception? And to try to correlate it with actual event that happened on the system, or markers, as we call them, and sort of give a better visibility to what's going on. As you can see, we totally we changed this page completely, and now you can see the actual trends and view the exceptions and cognitive insight and application insight as they come along, and to see exactly the volumes of them and to get the trends. In this example, we can see we had here a marker of a deployment of a version, and after that, we see that we have a few exceptions that are starting and going on. So this circle is when is the first time we actually saw this exception, and the trend of the exception, how often it happens. And again, here we see that we reverted, and that those problematic exceptions went away. That's the ideal, you know, it's after all, it is a demo. But the idea is, again, to have some better visibility and flexibility to understand when is this exception happen, when it started, and to be able to answer these kind of questions. Over here, we can also see the actual exception. So if I open it, I can see the actual exception that occurred. I can set whether it's an active, solved, maybe it's already a known issue that I don't want, this is an exception that is going on for a long, long time. I can assign it to someone, and he will, like the cognitive insight, he will actually get an email that this exception, this application insight was assigned to him with some actions around it, so we can keep track of what's going on. Severity, when was the first time this exception occurred, and the number of occurrence over time. We can also add filters here, so if you want to see only exceptions that are assigned to me, or if I want only to see application insight, cognitive insight, and so on. And we have the ability to play, again, with this graph and to change and remove if I want to see. And of course, it will scale itself on its own. So I'll be able to see if there's something that is very noisy, but something is hiding below this specific noisy exception, and it will realign the scale as well. One nice thing that we have, a part of this new page, is the ability to retain the trends and data for a much longer period. So if, for example, I'll go back and let's say you have a 14 days retention, here you'll have much more retention, I think up to a year of data that will be stored, and you can see your exception, how they behave when they started, and so on. And you can also clear the graph, and let's say I want to see only the new ones that happened during a specific time period. Then I just click here, plot insights, and it will show them again, and I can see them in the graph itself as I need it. So this is basically the application insight. I'll give it back to Daniel.
Thanks, Ran. So to sum it all up, these two features allow us to alleviate that paradox that we started the webinar with. The paradox between the growth on one hand in the data being shipped from our environments, and the decrease on the other hand in the value that we can extract from it. So the data optimizer is going to help us reduce logging costs and logging noise by helping us aggregate and summarize important data over time in dedicated accounts with extended retention. And application insight is going to help us identify any new exception being thrown by our application and give us the tools to understand the story, understand the context in which these errors and exceptions are being logged. So that about wraps it up for this webinar. If you want to read up more about these two features, there's plenty of resources available, both on our website, on our blog, a couple of videos on our YouTube channel as well. You'll get a follow-up email after this webinar with a recording and with this list of resources. And now it's time for you guys to shoot your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them all. Okay, so this one cuts right to the chase. How much does it cost? So basically both features now are in beta. Okay, Application Insights is part of all the Logz.io plans, so you can start playing around right away. To use the data optimizer, however, you'll need to reach out to us, contact us via the website, and we'll make sure to enable the feature for your account. How do I turn on Application Insights? So it's built in. It works out of the box. You don't need to configure anything, fine-tune anything. It all works. You just need to enter your account, and you should start seeing exceptions thrown by your applications. What tools does Application Insights integrate with? So that's a great question. So in essence, it can integrate with any tools. Okay, Jenkins, Puppet, Chef. All you have to do is configure your tool to log a specific log line that will tell us that a change has been applied, a new deployment, a rollback, etc.
So we have a question about, can a specific shipper have a specific retention period assigned to it, or is it global to the account type? So we have the ability to define sub-accounts that will be, basically the data will be differentiated by the token that will be needed to define in the shipper itself. And then there is a possibility to define different retention policies for different log types. That's part of the sub-accounts. So another question, when will the optimizer go live again? So we already started in a beta trial with a few customers. If it's something that interests for you guys, so just let us know. I think there is a page to request to join the beta. And once we understand better what is the use and what you need it for, we can discuss joining you to this beta. The plan is to open it to the wide, I think in Q1, to have it as a GA product.
What's the difference between Cognitive Insights and Application Insights? That's a great question. So basically, Cognitive Insights, we released this feature almost a year ago. And basically what Cognitive Insights is, it's based on machine learning, and we identify correlations between labels that we've trained the system to identify and discussions happening on the web. So for example, if there's a discussion on a specific Apache error log on Stack Overflow, and it passes our algorithms, so we'll flag this specific log message on the Insights page. And Application Insights is basically log messages that we've identified using machine learning patterns to be actually exceptions, application exceptions. What applications does Application Insights work with? That's also a very good question. So currently, as we're only in beta right now, we're talking about support for Java and .NET applications, but we're working on adding support for additional applications in Q1. News about that will come out soon, so stay tuned. Anybody else? Any additional questions? Okay, so thank you very much again for attending the webinar. We're very excited about these features. We feel they're groundbreaking and really going to help you guys extract more value from your data, like we said. Like I said, also you'll get a follow-up email with a recording and all the list of resources that you need to find out more about the features. Thanks, guys.